Welcome to Time Before Us, the channel where ancient history breathes again. Before time had a name, before the first human breath, there existed a world fierce, forgotten, and alive. Creatures of scale and silence, predators wrapped in feathers, titans that shook the earth, lives erased, bones buried beneath eternity. But they are not lost, they are waiting. This is Time Before Us, where prehistory worlds rise again, and the stories buried in stone finally speak. Chapter 1. The crocodile that hunted dinosaurs in the heart of prehistoric Africa. 112 million years ago, something monstrous lurked in the swamps and riverbanks, something with armor-plated skin, towering legs, and a snout filled with conical, crushing teeth. At first glance, you'd think it was just another crocodile, but then you'd see it stand up and walk on two legs. This wasn't a modern croc lounging in the reeds. This was Sarcosuchus imperator, and it was big enough to eat dinosaurs, literally at over 30 feet long and weighing more than 8 tons. This creature, often nicknamed the super croc, redefined everything we thought we knew about ancient predators. But what made Sarcosuchus so terrifying wasn't just its size. It was its adaptability, and it's just one player in a family of prehistoric, croc-like monsters that science is only beginning to understand. Because unlike the crocs we know today, some of their ancestors ran, hunted, and thrived on land. Some chased prey, some crushed bones, and others, like Sarcosuchus, simply waited and dragged entire dinosaurs into the water. So, how did crocodiles become the shadow predators of the Mesozoic? Let's rewind. A predator hidden in plain sight. The fossil record paints a shocking picture. While dinosaurs dominated the land, crocodilians, or more accurately, their ancestors, the crocodiliforms, were busy dominating everywhere else. Some were fully aquatic. Others were completely terrestrial, but Sarcosuchus imperator stood out. Discovered in the 1960s in Niger, and later more completely unearthed by Paul Sereno's team in 2000. Sarcosuchus didn't just challenge our ideas of crocodiles, it made youths wonder, who was really in charge near the water? This beast had a skull over 5 feet long, with a broad swollen snout and rows of teeth designed to grip and not let go. It didn't kill with speed, it killed with power. And unlike modern crocs that live in shallow water, Sarcosuchus may have lived in deeper, more expansive floodplains, where its sheer size kept it safe from almost everything. Because its prey wasn't fish. It was dinosaurs. A dinosaur's worst nightmare. Let's paint a scene. A young Ouranosaurus, a sail-backed herbivore, wanders down to drink at a riverbank. The forest is quiet. Suddenly, the water explodes. An 8-ton mass launches out of the shallows, jaws agape, teeth locking down with a bone-crushing force. It doesn't need to chew. It just needs to drag. And once the dinosaur is underwater, it's over. Sarcosuchus didn't need to chase its prey. It didn't need to be fast, it just needed to be patient. And that patience, honed over millions of years, made it one of the most effective ambush predators of its time. Its body was a fortress, layered in armored scutes, resistant to attacks from even large theropods. Its snout may have been sensitive to vibrations in water, meaning it could detect movement from meters away. In the right environment, it was untouchable. And what's even more surprising, it's not even the only giant croc on the list. More than one monster meet Dinosuchus, another prehistoric croc that rivaled Sarcosuchus in size, but lived tens of millions of years later in what is now North America. Its name literally means terrible crocodile, and fossil evidence suggests it preyed on hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, bite marks on bones, tooth imprints, croc teeth found near dinosaur carcasses. This wasn't speculation, it was proof. So, if Dinosuchus stalked the Cretaceous swamps of Texas, and Sarcosuchus prowled the rivers of Africa, who else was out there? How about Caprisuchus, the boar croc discovered in the Sahara? This smaller but equally bizarre creature had forward-facing tusk-like teeth and a body that appeared built for running, not swimming. That's right. A land predator with a skull like a boar, legs like a reptilian cheetah, and the instincts of a killer. It probably ambushed prey in drier environments, leaping out of undergrowth instead of water. Then there's Anatocychus, the duck croc, and Loganocychus, the pancake croc, a sit-and-wait predator that may have rested motionless for hours until prey wandered too close. These weren't variants of modern crocodiles. They were something else entirely. So, were crocs smarter than we thought? You might think of crocodiles as slow, cold-blooded, ancient reptiles. But new research suggests their brains were surprisingly advanced for reptiles. Modern crocs show complex behaviors, parental care, coordinated hunting, even tool use. That's right, some crocodiles today have been observed placing sticks on their heads to lure birds. If today's crocs can do that, imagine what their ancient cousins were capable of, especially ones with longer legs, bigger brains, and a head full of dagger-like teeth. Why didn't they rule the world? If prehistoric crocodiles were so powerful, so adaptable, why didn't they replace dinosaurs? The answer lies in their niche. Dinosaurs, especially theropods, ruled the open landscapes, the forests, the plains. But crocodiliforms? They ruled the margins, the rivers, swamps, and murky ambush zones. They didn't need to compete. They just waited. And while many species died out by the end of the Cretaceous, one lineage endured. It shrunk. It adapted. It survived the asteroid. And it gave us the crocodiles we know today, cousins of Sarcosuchus. But not its equals. The croc that hunted dinosaurs. We love to talk about T-Rex, Velociraptor, and other headline-grabbing dinosaurs. But the true monsters of the prehistoric world weren't always the ones roaring through the trees. Sometimes they were silent, still, watching. And when they struck, they didn't just kill, they erased. No bones, no screams, just ripples on the water. Sarcosuchus reminds us of something we often forget in paleontology. Not all predators look the way we expect, and sometimes the biggest threat isn't the loudest. It's the one that waits in silence beneath the surface. Waiting for its moment. Chapter 2. The shark that lived in freshwater. When you think of sharks, you probably picture endless blue ocean, vast, salty, sunlit waters where apex predators cruise silently through the waves. But what if we told you one of the most powerful, adaptable, and mysterious sharks of all time didn't live in the sea at all? It lurked in rivers, lived in deltas, swam through murky lakes and freshwater floodplains where dinosaurs came to drink. This was Hybotus, an ancient shark that didn't play by the rules, a predator that could thrive where few others could. And Hybotus wasn't alone, because as we peel back the layers of prehistoric time, we find something shocking. Sharks have been living in freshwater for hundreds of millions of years, long before they earned their reputation as rulers of the oceans. Some evolved to go back and forth between salt and fresh water. Some stayed landlocked for life, and a few got even bigger in rivers than they ever did at sea. Freshwater sharks? Really? Yes. And not just once. Multiple shark lineages evolved this behavior. Today, we still have bull sharks famous for their ability to swim up rivers. They've been found hundreds of miles inland, even in freshwater lakes. They've attacked in rivers in Nicaragua and the Mississippi. Some scientists believe that prehistoric sharks did the same, but on a much larger scale. Enter Hybotus, a genus of shark-like fish that appeared during the late Permian and lasted all the way into the late Cretaceous. That's over 200 million years of dominance. This wasn't a true shark as we know it today, but it was close. It had a torpedo-shaped body, dual dorsal fins with spines, and multiple rows of teeth suited for gripping prey, plus flat crushing teeth in the back to break open shells. That meant one thing. It ate everything. And Hybotis fossils have been found in marine and freshwater deposits, proving it could thrive in both worlds. Imagine that flexibility, able to swim with ammonites one day, then stalk a river packed with dinosaur hatchlings, the next. Sharks in the shadow of dinosaurs. Rivers during the Mesozoic weren't safe, not because of crocodiles. Not because of giant fish, but because of these freshwater adapted sharks, hiding beneath the surface. And remember, rivers were often surrounded by herds of dinosaurs, nesting grounds, juveniles crossing water to reach new feeding spots. These weren't just watering holes. They were hunting grounds, fossils of fresh water. Sharks have been found near the remains of hadrosaurs, ceratopsians, even early birds. While there's no direct evidence of predation, the proximity tells a compelling story. Some of these sharks were more than scavengers. They were opportunists, predators that thrived in environments others couldn't handle. A family of river killers. Let's go wider than Hybodus. How about Orthocanthus, a shark from the Carboniferous period that lived exclusively in swamps and freshwater lagoons? It had a long eel-like body, a spiny dorsal fin that ran the length of its back, and wait for it, a second set of jaws inside its throat, called pharyngeal jaws. Yes, real-life nightmare fuel. Some estimates say it could reach 10 feet in length, and fossilized stomach contents suggest it ate amphibians, fish, and even members of its own species. Then there's Xenocanthus, another freshwater predator with strange head spines and an elongated sinuous shape. It lived in environments so oxygen-poor that few other animals could compete, making it the top predator by default. These sharks didn't just survive in fresh water. They thrived in it. And over millions of years, that gave them an evolutionary edge, the secret weapon. Versatility. What made these ancient sharks so successful wasn't just their teeth or stealth. It was their adaptability, being able to shift between marine and freshwater systems is no small feat. It means your body can regulate osmoregulation, the balance of salt and water in cells. Most fish can't do this, but some sharks, especially Hybotis and modern bull sharks, evolved systems that allow them to flush or retain salt, depending on their environment. That gave them access to new prey, safer breeding grounds, and less competition. It's like being a lion that can also hunt in the ocean. No other predator could match it. And over time, this ability may have helped these sharks outlast entire ecosystems. The monster we almost missed. Let's not forget Megalodon, the massive 60-foot monster often portrayed as a purely marine predator. But some fossilized teeth have been found near estuarine and riverine deposits, raising questions. Could juvenile megalodons have used freshwater nurseries? It's possible. Today, young bull sharks swim upriver to avoid larger predators and grow safely. Maybe Megalodon did the same. If so, then even the most famous prehistoric shark may have started its life in the shadowy depths of ancient rivers. A place we rarely look, and that's the point, because some of the most extraordinary prehistoric animals didn't live where we expected. They didn't rule oceans. They ruled the places we thought were safe. Why we're only just discovering this. You'd think sharks would leave more fossils. But shark skeletons are made of cartilage, not bone, which decomposes far faster than fossilization requires. So we're often left with teeth, sometimes vertebrae, rarely full skeletons. That means many freshwater species may have gone undiscovered, their remains eroded, buried, or misidentified. But with every riverbed dig, every new paleontology expedition, we find more clues that freshwater wasn't just a home for amphibians and crocodiles. It was a theater of apex predators, and sharks? They played the leading role. The legacy lives on. Bull sharks, river sharks in Southeast Asia, the Ganges shark. Freshwater shark species still exist, though some are endangered. They remind us that evolution didn't stop at the ocean's edge. That prehistoric survival meant going where others couldn't, the river. The lake, the swamp, places where vision is limited, prey is unpredictable, and ambush is king. In those environments, sharks didn't just survive, they ruled. So the next time someone says, sharks live in the ocean, ask them this: do they know what's in the river? Chapter 3. When turtles had teeth and tails. Today's turtles are quiet, peaceful creatures. Some are majestic swimmers. Others plod through forests or deserts with gentle determination. Most people think of them as harmless, slow-moving herbivores that hide in their shells. But the ancestors of modern turtles? They were something else entirely. In prehistoric times, turtles didn't just defend themselves, they fought back. Some had massive jaws and terrifying bite forces. Others had armor-plated bodies, club-like tails, and a kind of confidence you don't normally associate with a creature that moves 1 mile per hour. And yes, some had teeth. Real, bony, serrated teeth. These weren't the turtles, you know. These were the prehistoric brawlers of the reptile world. And their story starts long before the age of dinosaurs. Turtles. Before turtles go back 220 million years, into the late Triassic. The world was hot, humid, and teeming with bizarre life. Reptiles were beginning to experiment with all kinds of body shapes, long necks, bipedal strides, sail-backed spines, and among them was Odontochelys, semitestacea. This creature is often considered the earliest known proto-turtle. It had a fully developed plastron, that's the flat belly shell, but only a partial top shell, like a vest that hadn't been zipped up. And here's the twist. It had teeth. Unlike modern turtles with sharp beaks, Odontochelys had rows of small, pointed teeth lining its jaws, ideal for catching soft prey like insects or small fish. It could swim, it could bite, and it could take care of itself. And that was just the beginning. Meet Meiolania, the armored tank. Fast forward to the Pleistocene, and you'll find Meiolania, a turtle that lived on islands like Lord Howe and New Caledonia. It wasn't small. Some estimates suggest it was over 8 feet long, weighing half a ton. But what made Meiolania really stand out wasn't just its size. It was its tail, a long, thick appendage covered in bony spikes, ending in a mace-like club. It looked like something an ankylosaur would swing. In fact, some paleontologists believe this tail was used for defense or even combat between individuals, possibly for territory or mates. Its head was horned, its shell was thick, and its overall vibe was medieval siege weapon. This was no beach-crawling pacifist. This was a turtle you gave space, tooth or beak. Why it matters, or why do we care if turtles once had teeth? Because it reveals how much evolution has sculpted this group over time. Modern turtles use keratinous beaks, sharp, horn-covered structures, to slice through vegetation or crush mollusks. But their ancestors had true dentition, meaning they could likely handle a more varied diet. Some were herbivores, some were insectivores, some may have been outright predators, and that paints a radically different picture from the turtle stereotypes we've grown used to. The monster of the Miocene, Stupendum is no. Brace yourself for this one. In the Miocene epoch, around 5 to 10 million years ago, South America was home to a giant among turtles, Stupendomys geographicus. The name says it all. Stupendomys, as in stupendous turtle. This freshwater behemoth had a shell nearly 10 feet long. That's the size of a small car. It weighed over a ton and lived in the massive Amazonian wetlands. But here's what really shocked scientists when they dug up its fossils. Some specimens had giant horns protruding from the front of their shells, possibly for fighting, not unlike bighorn sheep. And fossil evidence shows that these turtles coexisted with massive caimans like Purosaurus, 30-foot crocodilian monsters. So how did Stupendomys survive? Its shell wasn't just for protection. It was a battle station. Its skull was broad and flat, likely giving it a devastating bite, enough to crunch through thick vegetation or defend itself from predators. This was a turtle that refused to be prey When turtles hunted now, let's get even weirder. Some fossil turtles didn't just defend themselves or graze on plants. They actively hunted. Proganishles, another early turtle from the late Triassic, had no beak and a spiked tail. Its skull structure suggests it may have used quick jaw movements to snap at prey. Even today, its distant descendants still carry that legacy. Look at snapping turtles. These modern reptiles, especially the alligator snapping turtle, are basically living fossils, with their hooked beaks, powerful neck strikes, and jaws that can crush bone. Snapping turtles remind us what ancient turtles may have been capable of. Some prehistoric species likely behaved exactly like them, lying motionless in murky waters, then launching forward in an explosion of violence. Fast? No. Effective? Absolutely. Why did these turtles go extinct? With their size, armor, and terrifying bites, why did these ancient turtles disappear? Simple. Ecological change. As climates shifted, forests disappeared, and large freshwater systems shrank, the mega turtles lost their strongholds. Human activity didn't help either. Evidence suggests that early humans may have hunted species like millennia to extinction on islands as recently as 2,000 years ago. They were slow, large, easy to kill, and likely full of meat. Once again, evolution favored small, adaptable species over the giants of the past. The legacy lives on today's turtles are a shadow of their prehistoric ancestors, but the DNA hasn't forgotten. You can still see hints of those fearsome traits. The snapping turtle's bone-crushing bite, the sea turtle's vast migration ability, the tortoise's indestructible shell, red-eared slider's territorial aggression, and just imagine what we've missed in the fossil record. Because shell fossils preserve well, but teeth, tails, and soft tissues? Often lost. Who knows how many turtle species once roamed the earth, fast, sharp, and unstoppable, before vanishing without a trace? When turtles were warriors, we tend to think of turtles as slow and peaceful. But millions of years ago, some were anything but. They bit, they hunted, they wielded tail clubs like hammers, they fought crocodiles. They lived alongside giant predators, and in a world filled with claws, teeth, and terror, they carved out their own brutal legacy, one shell at a time. Chapter 4. The dinosaur that dug like a mole. Dinosaurs came in all shapes and sizes. Some ruled the skies, others thundered across the plains. But buried beneath the surface, sometimes literally, were creatures that played a different game. Enter Orictodromeus. Its name means digging runner, and it's one of the few dinosaurs known to live in burrows. That's right, a dinosaur that dug holes. For millions of years, paleontology has focused on the big, flashy stars of the fossil record: T-Rex, Triceratops, Velociraptor. But every so often, we unearth a creature that completely changes the rules. Orictodromeus wasn't big, it wasn't ferocious, but it was uniquely adapted for life underground, a survival strategy that probably helped it evade predators, raise young, and endure harsh climates. And it's not alone. Because once we started looking for diggers in the Mesozoic world, we found more than we expected. The discovery that changed everything in 2007. Scientists working in Montana made a shocking discovery: a fossilized dinosaur skeleton found inside what looked like a burrow. Not just bones near a hole. The dinosaur's body was curved to fit the tunnel, nestled in sediment in a way that clearly suggested it had died where it had lived. The species? Orictodromeus cubic ULAR is dotted about 6.5 feet long from snout to tail. This small herbivore looked a bit like a stretched-out kangaroo, with long legs, a stiff tail, and a narrow, elongated head. But look closer, and the adaptations get wild. Its forelimbs were unusually strong, with curved claws ideal for shoveling dirt. Its snout was narrow, likely suited for rooting or pushing soil. Its hips and vertebrae were reinforced, perfect for wriggling in and out of tunnels without injury. And most important of all, it was found with juveniles. That's right, parents and young, all buried in the same burrow. This wasn't a fluke. It was a lifestyle. Why would a dinosaur dig? You might be wondering, what's the benefit? In a world of massive carnivores, flying reptiles, and extreme climates, burrowing offered a powerful survival advantage. Think about it. Protection from predators. Hiding underground is an ancient tactic still used by many modern animals. Temperature control. Burrows are cooler in heat, warmer in cold. Nesting. Perfect for raising young safely, away from scavengers and weather. Ambush potential. In smaller predators, burrowing could provide cover for surprise attacks. And once dinosaurs evolved the tools to dig, strong limbs, compact bodies, stable hips, they had everything they needed to build a hidden world beneath the surface. Orictodromeus wasn't the only one. The underground club. There's growing evidence that multiple dinosaur species may have dug, nested, or sheltered in burrows. Lilinosaura, a small herbivore from ancient Australia, lived in polar environments where winter lasted months. Its oversized optic lobes suggest it had excellent low-light vision and possibly spent part of the year in burrows to escape the cold. Tianyulong, a feathered heterodinosauride from China, had a compact body and forelimbs that some paleontologists suspect were suited to digging or pushing vegetation. Psittacosaurus, a small ceratopsian, is sometimes found in densely packed clusters, possibly family groups in shared burrows. While none of these species show burrowing as clearly as Orictodromeus, they hint at something exciting. Dinosaurs weren't just surface dwellers. Some of them, small, quick, clever, had begun to master life below. More than just dirt, the architecture of burrows. The Orictodromeus burrow itself is a marvel. It spiraled downward about 2 meters, 6.5 feet, ending in a chamber just wide enough to curl up inside. And here's where it gets eerie. The fossilized remains weren't crushed or scattered. They were preserved in situ, like a snapshot frozen in time. Experts believe the burrow collapsed or filled in rapidly, possibly after a flood or landslide, trapping the animals inside. But that tragic end gave us the first direct evidence of burrowing behavior in dinosaurs. And it raises an intriguing question. How many other dinosaur burrows have we missed? If a creature dies underground, erosion or pressure might destroy all trace of the tunnel. Unless you're lucky enough to find a perfectly preserved case, like this one, you'd never know they dug it all. So this discovery doesn't just tell us about one species. It opens a whole new field of possibility. What kind of dinosaur was Orictodromeus really? At first glance, you'd think it was a fast-moving, bipedal herbivore, which it was, but its limb proportions suggest it may have moved on all fours when digging or foraging, then stood upright to flee danger. Its teeth were adapted for chewing tough vegetation, and its narrow jaws may have been perfect for nibbling low plants, ideal for life close to the ground. Most fascinating, though, is what its lifestyle implies. It may have lived in small family groups, raising young underground, protecting them until they could run. This level of social structure was once thought to be rare in dinosaurs. But now, we're beginning to see patterns that suggest care, coordination, and even community, all built around a burrowing lifestyle. The evolutionary parallel. Modern animals like meerkats, prairie dogs, wombats, and moles all rely on burrowing to survive. So why not dinosaurs? If mammals, reptiles, and even birds, some nest underground, develop this strategy, it makes perfect sense that small, smart dinosaurs might do the same. And in ecosystems filled with giant predators, from Allosaurus to Spinosaurus, digging a hole might be your only real defense, especially if you're only the size of a golden retriever. Could digging dinosaurs still be waiting to be found? Most paleontology happens at the surface. We dig down to find fossils. But what if we need to dig sideways? If dinosaur burrows exist, Many are probably collapsed, eroded, or filled with sediment so subtly that they're nearly invisible. But with newer ground-penetrating radar, 3D mapping, and advanced sedimentology, scientists are starting to identify ancient animal tunnels more reliably. And that means Orictodromeus might not be a rare exception. It might be the first of many quiet survivors in a world filled with roaring predators and stampeding herds. It's easy to overlook the quiet ones, but creatures like Orictodromeus show us that survival isn't always about teeth, speed, or armor. Sometimes it's about cleverness, adaptability, and digging in. It reminds us that prehistoric life wasn't always about the biggest and the boldest. Sometimes the most successful were the ones who hid underground and waited out the storm. Chapter 5: Giant amphibians that ruled before dinosaurs. When we picture giant prehistoric beasts, our minds immediately jump to dinosaurs. Massive sauropods, terrifying theropods, armored giants, but millions of years before the first dinosaur ever walked the earth, the planet was already crawling with monsters, and some of the earliest ones were amphibians. Yes, amphibians, like frogs, like salamanders. Except these weren't tiny creatures hiding in your backyard pond. These were 6 foot long, heavily muscled, flat-headed swamp beasts with jaws strong enough to crush bone and bodies built for ambush. And for millions of years, they were the apex predators. Welcome to the world of temnospondyls, the ancient lineage of amphibians that once ruled rivers, lakes, and wetlands during the Permian and early Triassic periods, long before the first dinosaur took a breath. Before dinosaurs, there were monsters in the water. Let's rewind the clock about 290 million years. The Earth was hotter. Continental plates were still merging into the supercontinent Pangaea. Swamps and wetlands dominated huge swaths of land. And lurking in these waters was Prionosuchus, possibly the largest amphibian ever discovered. Estimates suggest it grew up to 30 feet long. That's the size of a modern-day saltwater crocodile. Its skull alone was over 5 feet long, filled with teeth designed for gripping slippery prey like fish or anything else foolish enough to enter the water. But unlike crocs, Prionosuchus was amphibious, with soft, permeable skin, a sprawling body, and eyes perched high on its flat head, perfect for watching from beneath the surface. Sound familiar? It was an ambush predator, just like modern alligators or gharials. Except it wasn't a reptile. It was an amphibian. The forgotten apex predators. For years, we've focused on the giants of the Jurassic and Cretaceous. But before any of that, the Permian period had its own deadly dynasties. Creatures like Eriops, a broad-headed, flat-bodied predator about 5 feet long, with a bite strong enough to crush armor. Mastodonsaurus, with eyes on top of its head and a skull shaped like a spade. It lived in shallow rivers and hunted anything that moved. Metaposaurus, flat as a manhole cover, with a body built to lurk in murky floodplains. These weren't quick. They didn't chase. They waited, camouflaged, silent, cold-blooded patience. And when the moment came, they struck all at once, with a powerful snap of jaws and a surge of muscle. Even early reptiles gave them a wide berth, because for a time, in a world not yet ruled by dinosaurs, amphibians were kings. What made them so effective? The secret was evolutionary timing. Amphibians were among the first vertebrates to conquer land, evolving from lobe-finned fish in the Devonian period, over 360 million years ago. That gave them a massive head start. For millions of years, the climate was warm and wet, perfect for amphibians. With moist skin and external eggs, they didn't need to evolve beyond that. They just got bigger, wider jaws, longer bodies, more specialized limbs. They filled the same niche that crocodiles would later occupy, and did it better in their own time. In fact, in many ancient ecosystems, there were no crocodiles or large reptiles, just giant amphibians. with mouths wide enough to swallow early reptiles whole. But they weren't just predators. While many temnospondyls were meat-eaters, some evolved into herbivores, or omnivores. Fossils show tooth patterns designed for grinding plant matter, and others reveal creatures that fed on insects or small vertebrates. There were burrowers, swimmers, crawlers. Some lived in coastal estuaries. Others thrived in temporary ponds. They weren't just predators, they were ecosystem engineers. And as their habitats spread across what is now Europe, North America, and Africa, they adapted to almost every wetland environment on Earth. Downfall. When the climate turned so, what happened? Why don't we still have 6-foot amphibians wading in our rivers? The short answer: the Permian-Triassic extinction. Roughly 252 million years ago, Earth experienced the most devastating mass extinction in its history, wiping out over 90% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial life. Massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia triggered climate chaos. Temperatures spiked, oxygen levels plummeted, and shallow wetlands dried up. Amphibians, so dependent on moist environments, were especially vulnerable. Many lineages went extinct, but a few survivors held on and passed their genes forward. And though the age of the amphibian giants ended, their descendants quietly endured. The hidden legacy in modern amphibians: today's frogs, salamanders, and caecilians might seem unimpressive compared to their ancestors, but they carry the same DNA. They still breathe partially through their skin, still lay eggs in water. And they still haunt the edges of swamps, ponds, and rivers just like Eriops did nearly 300 million years ago. And occasionally, they remind us of their power. Look at the Chinese giant salamander, which can reach over 5 feet long, or the hellbender, a cryptic salamander found in Appalachian streams with skin like armor and jaws that can take a chunk out of a fish. These aren't throwbacks, they're survivors, carrying the torch of a time when amphibians ruled the earth, a time before dinosaurs. Story of life on Earth isn't just about who ruled. It's about when they ruled. Before the dinosaurs, before mammals, even before crocodiles, the first apex predators were cold-blooded, wide-headed amphibians that watched from the water's edge, waiting for a ripple, a footstep, a mistake, and then they struck. They didn't roar, they didn't chase, they just waited. And one. Chapter 6. The bird that had teeth and a dinosaur's tail. When you picture a bird, you probably imagine something light, fast, and graceful. A robin perched on a fence, an eagle soaring high above, a hummingbird suspended in midair. Now imagine that bird with jagged teeth in its beak, clawed fingers on its wings, and a reptilian tail made of bone. That was Archaeopteryx, and for over 150 years, it's been at the center of one of the most incredible stories in science, the moment dinosaurs became birds. But here's the twist: Archaeopteryx wasn't quite a bird, and it wasn't fully a dinosaur either. It was something in between, something that shouldn't have existed, and yet it did. And for a long time, it was the missing link. No one thought we'd ever find. The first feathered dinosaur ever discovered in 1861. A strange fossil was found in the limestone quarries of Solnhofen, Germany. It had feathers, but it also had teeth. It had wings, but also claws on those wings. It had a wishbone and a long lizard-like tail. Scientists were stunned. What was this thing? They named it Archaeopteryx lithographica, meaning ancient wing carved in stone. And almost overnight, it changed the world. Why? Because just 2 years earlier, Charles Darwin had published on the origin of species, proposing that species evolve gradually over time. Archaeopteryx seemed to prove it. Here was a creature that looked like a perfect transition from non-avian dinosaurs to modern birds. Half one thing, half another. A snapshot of evolution in progress. What did Archaeopteryx actually look like? Forget the tidy museum models. This wasn't a pigeon with teeth. Archaeopteryx was about the size of a raven, with a wingspan just under 2 feet. Its body was covered in feathers, real, asymmetrical flight feathers like modern birds. But its skeleton told a different story. Teeth lined its jaws, sharp and pointed. Like a predator's, claws protruded from its wing fingers, 3 on each side. Its tail was long and bony, not the short fused tailbones of today's birds. Its sternum, the chest bone that anchors powerful flight muscles, was small and weak. Its brain showed signs of advanced vision and balance, traits of flying animals. So what was it? A bird that hadn't finished becoming a bird? Or a dinosaur trying to take flight? The answer might be both. Could Archaeopteryx fly? This question has haunted paleontologists for over a century. Its feathers were clearly built for flight. They had the right shape, structure, and asymmetry, but its small sternum and awkward limb proportions suggest it wasn't a strong flyer. Most scientists believe Archaeopteryx could probably glide, maybe flap in short bursts like a modern pheasant or a partridge, not a swallow. It likely launched itself from trees or rocky cliffs, using a running start or leap. That means flight didn't arrive all at once. It evolved slowly, in stages. Feathers first helped with insulation and display, then with gliding. Only later did full-powered flight emerge. Archaeopteryx shows us that in-between stage, not grounded, not airborne. But learning. More than just one specimen since that first discovery. Over a dozen Archaeopteryx specimens have been found, all from the same limestone deposits in Germany. Each one offers new insights, slightly different shapes, sizes, feather impressions, or skeletal quirks. Some even show faint signs of color patterns, suggesting this creature wasn't just functional. It was visually striking. Imagine black and white feathers, iridescent glints, a flashing display against Jurassic greenery. This was no dull dinosaur-bird. This was something beautiful, alien, and alive with motion. Archaeopteryx wasn't alone for years. Scientists treated Archaeopteryx like the one magical bridge between dinosaurs and birds. But now we know better, thanks to fossils from China, especially in the Liaoning province. We've discovered dozens of feathered dinosaurs that blur the lines just as much, and sometimes more. Creatures like Anchiornis, a 4-winged glider with feathers on its legs; Microraptor, a tiny, black-feathered predator with tail fans, and flight feathers on all limbs. Iotingia, which may be even closer to birds than Archaeopteryx. These creatures show that Archaeopteryx wasn't a freak accident, that it was part of a bigger evolutionary explosion, where feathers, flight, and bird-like traits were evolving in multiple lineages at once. And here's the kicker. Some of those lineages didn't survive. So Archaeopteryx might not be our direct ancestor. It might be a side branch, a cousin species that showed what was possible, even if it didn't lead directly to modern birds. The dinosaur inside the bird. Here's the part that gets even weirder. Modern birds are dinosaurs. Not just related to them. They are the last surviving group of theropod dinosaurs. The same clade that includes Velociraptor, T-Rex, and Allosaurus. That means when you see a pigeon bobbing along the sidewalk, you're looking at the descendant of creatures that once hunted with claws and teeth. And Archaeopteryx shows us what that transition looked like in real time, from tailbones to feathers, from teeth to beaks, from clawed fingers to wings. The changes didn't happen overnight. They happened slowly, step by step, one generation at a time. And Archaeopteryx is one of those steps made stone. The controversies that won't go away, even today. Archaeopteryx sparks debate. Is it a true bird? Is it a dinosaur with feathers? Is it a fluke or a key player? Some studies suggest it's closer to Dromaeosaurs, the group that includes Velociraptor, than to true birds. Others argue it's part of the Aviolans, the early bird group, that eventually gave rise to sparrows and hawks. What's clear is this: it lived at the very edge of flight, the very edge of modernity. the razor-thin line between one era and the next. And it's still teaching us what it means to evolve. Why? It still matters today every time we find a new feathered fossil. We look back at Archaeopteryx and re-ask the same question. Where did birds come from? How did dinosaurs take to the skies? And what did the world look like before birds were birds? Archaeopteryx is more than a fossil. It's a symbol of transformation, of nature experimenting, failing, succeeding. A creature with feet in two worlds, flapping awkwardly between them. And maybe, in a way, that's why we're still so fascinated. Because Archaeopteryx reminds us that evolution isn't neat. It's messy, transitional, sometimes strange, but it works. And that's what gives us the hawk's dive, the hummingbirds hover, and the soft rustle of wings over morning fields. All because, once upon a time, a dinosaur grew feathers. And lip. Chapter 7. The raptor that hunted at night. When we think of raptors, we imagine blazing speed, daylight chases, claws slashing under the sun. But what if some raptors didn't live by the sun at all? What if one of the most fascinating predatory dinosaurs hunted in near total darkness? Say hello to Truden, a small, bird-like theropod that's earned a strange reputation over the years. Smart, quick, light on its feet. But here's what makes it truly special. Its eyes, massive, forward-facing, and perfectly structured for low-light vision. Truden might have been the first true nocturnal predator of the dinosaur world. And when you dig into its anatomy, its brain, its senses, you begin to realize this wasn't just another little hunter. This was something different. Something that watched the world while others slept. Meet Truden, the brainy raptor first discovered in the 1850s. Truden has long fascinated paleontologists, not because it was big or strong, but because it was clever. How clever? Among all non-avian dinosaurs, Truden had one of the largest brain-to-body ratios ever recorded. Its brain was relatively large for its size. Not unlike a modern bird of prey. It stood about 3 feet tall, was roughly 6 to 8 feet long, mostly tail, and weighed about 100 pounds. It walked on 2 legs, had 3-fingered hands with semi-opposable thumbs, and razor-sharp claws. But most striking of all were its enormous eyes. Each eye was positioned slightly forward, giving it binocular vision, a crucial trait for depth perception, especially in low light. Combine that with a likely highly developed inner ear, and you get a creature that wasn't just smart. It was aware. It could stalk, listen, and pounce, not by brute force, but by outthinking its prey. Eyes built for darkness. So how do we know Truden may have hunted at night? It comes down to a little thing called the scleral ring, a bony structure found in the eyes of many reptiles and birds. In 2011, a team of scientists led by Lars Schmitz and Ryusuke Motani compared scleral ring sizes in dozens of extinct and modern species. And Truden? Its rings matched those of nocturnal birds, specifically birds that hunt at night, like owls. In fact, its eye-to-skull ratio was so extreme, it suggested not just nocturnality, but specialized noctu RNAL. Eye-to-wide. Think about that. In the age of dinosaurs, when most predators hunted in daylight, Truden carved out its own niche, the night shift, the owl analogy. More accurate than you'd think. Modern owls are almost silent when they fly. They use asymmetrical ears to pinpoint sounds, and their feathers muffle wing beats. While we have no fossilized feathers for Truden with this kind of detail, its body structure suggests it was fast, agile, and extremely quiet. Its slender legs indicate a good runner. Its lightweight frame, likely covered in feathers, made it quick and flexible. And its intelligence hints at complex behavior. Could it plan, trap, outsmart? Probably not on a human level, but maybe on the level of a raven or an eagle, which is still impressive for a dinosaur. It may have even had keen hearing, helping it locate small mammals or lizards in the underbrush. Just like an owl triangulates a mouse under snow. What did Truden eat? It likely ate small prey, mammals, reptiles, insects, maybe even hatchling dinosaurs. Its teeth were unusual, small, with fine serrations. Some paleontologists argue they were suited not just for flesh, but possibly for omnivory, meaning Truden might have eaten plants or eggs when needed. This dietary flexibility could explain why it was so successful in northern climates, where food was scarce in winter. In fact, fossils of Truden have been found in Alaska, where seasonal darkness could last for months. If it truly was nocturnal, Truden may have been one of the few dinosaurs able to thrive in the Arctic Circle. Long before mammals dominated the night, not alone in the shadows, while Truden is the best known, it wasn't the only dinosaur that may have hunted in darkness. Studies of Dromaeosaurus and even Velociraptor suggest similar adaptations, though less extreme. The bigger picture? We used to think of dinosaurs as exclusively daytime animals, diurnal hunters under a blazing Mesozoic sun. But evidence now suggests a range of activity patterns. Some hunted in daylight, some at dusk, and some, like Truden, embrace the night, which makes sense. Modern birds and reptiles do the same. Evolution, after all, favors those who can take advantage of any available niche, even the dark. A glimpse into mammal territory. Here's where it gets even more fascinating. For decades, scientists believed dinosaurs ruled the day, and mammals ruled the night, a kind of ecological truce. Truden blurs that line. It suggests that some dinosaurs invaded the night, competing with early mammals directly, which may have forced mammals to get sneakier, faster, better at hiding. This evolutionary arms race between sharp-eyed raptors and nimble night crawlers may have helped shape the mammals that eventually gave rise to us. In other words, Truden may have hunted our ancestors, and their battle in the dark changed history. What happened to Truden? Like most non-avian dinosaurs, Truden disappeared in the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction about 66 million years ago. But what it left behind was more than bones. It left a blueprint, a model for night hunting, for intelligence, for agility, and innovation. Modern birds may not be descended directly from Truden, but they inherited its spirit, its ability to thrive in unlikely places. And in owls, in nightjars, in stealthy jungle birds, that spirit still lives on. The raptor you never saw coming. Truden doesn't roar. It doesn't tower over trees. It doesn't tear through packs like T-Rex. It waits. It watches. It learns. It was the ghost of the dinosaur world, silent, clever, and precise. And while the world slept, Truden hunted. Not because it was the biggest. Not because it was the fastest, but because it saw what others didn't. It saw. In the Dark, Chapter 8, Dinosaurs that lived in the snow. Dinosaurs in the snow. It sounds almost absurd. After all, we've been conditioned by movies, books, and even museum displays to think of them basking under tropical canopies, stomping through sun-drenched valleys, or chasing prey across blistering deserts. But here's the truth. Some dinosaurs lived at the poles. Where snow fell, where winters stretched for months, where darkness consumed half the year. And they didn't just survive there, they thrived. Let's head to the ancient Arctic and Antarctic, where some of the most unexpected dinosaurs of all were right at home. Welcome to the polar past. Let's go back 70 to 110 million years. During the mid to late Cretaceous, the continents looked different, but the Earth's poles were still tilted, meaning there were seasons. Long, harsh winters, near permanent night during parts of the year, and while global temperatures were warmer than today, no ice caps yet, the poles still experienced cold, dark months. Forests froze, swamps dried, snow likely fell, yet dinosaurs were there, not just passing through, living there. Fossils of polar dinosaurs have been found in places like northern Alaska, Prince Creek Formation, southern Australia, Victoria and New South Wales, Antarctica, Mount Kirkpatrick, in fact, in ancient Alaska. Some species likely stayed year-round, enduring months of near-freezing temperatures. Why? Because they were adapted for it. The Arctic hadrosaurs in Alaska's Prince Creek Formation. Paleontologists discovered thousands of dinosaur bones. Among them were the remains of a species known as Eugrunala a type of hadrosaur, a duck-billed herbivore. These were herd animals, and they didn't migrate. They lived up north all year long. That means they had to survive long, cold winters, constant darkness for several months, frozen or snow-covered vegetation. So how did they do it? Fossils show growth rings in their bones, much like tree rings, suggesting seasonal growth, a pattern seen in animals that slow down during tough seasons. They also have large eyes, possibly adapted for low light, and powerful jaw muscles, ideal for chewing tough, frozen plants. And there's evidence they traveled in family groups, likely offering protection, warmth, and shared knowledge. Just imagine it, a herd of 30-foot-long hadrosaurs trudging through snow-dusted forests, breathing steam into the cold air, calling to each other with haunting bellows. This wasn't fantasy. This was their home. The polar raptors, where there are herbivores, there are hunters. And the polar regions have their own, like Truden, which we explored earlier. But in southern Australia, another predator lurked, Timmaemus hermanni, found in what was once a polar forest. This small, fast-running theropod may have been feathered, warm-blooded, and smart, the perfect tool for tracking prey in cold twilight conditions. There's also Leelinosaura, a small herbivorous dinosaur with enormous eyes, thought to be adapted for long periods of darkness. Its fossilized skeletons show no signs of migration. These animals stayed put. They were likely feathered, possibly even fuzzy, using their insulation the way modern birds do to survive winter. And they didn't hibernate. They kept moving, foraging, living, even when the sun disappeared. But how could cold-blooded creatures live in the cold? Here's where everything changes. For decades, dinosaurs were labeled as slow, scaly, cold-blooded reptiles, like oversized lizards. But then came the feathers, the fast growth rates, the bird-like bone structures. And the realization that many dinosaurs, especially theropods and smaller ornithopods, were likely warm-blooded, or at least mesothermic, something in between cold and warm-blooded. That means they could generate and regulate body heat, a crucial adaptation for surviving cold climates. Feathers may have started as insulation, not flight. Burrows and nests helped conserve warmth. Social behavior, like huddling, may have helped. Think of how penguins survive Antarctic winters by crowding together. Now imagine small dinosaurs doing something similar. This wasn't just survival. It was adaptation at its finest. Snowy forests of Antarctica. Antarctica today is a frozen desert. But during the Cretaceous, it was a land of tall conifers, river systems, and valleys. Though still cold, especially during winter, there, paleontologists found Cryolophosaurus, a large carnivore with a strange crest on its head, sometimes nicknamed the Elvisaurus. This dinosaur lived in what's now Mount Kirkpatrick, a region that would have experienced long, dark seasons. It likely had to hunt in darkness, survive food scarcity, and navigate snow-covered terrain. Also found in the area were sauropods, smaller herbivores, and early birds, all indicators that dinosaurs truly had colonized every environment, even the ones that would challenge them the most. Could dinosaurs really live in snow? We don't have direct fossil evidence of snowflakes falling on dinosaur snouts, but we have clues, tree rings from polar forests that show seasonal freezing dinosaur bones with growth halts during winter, ancient soil patterns indicating permafrost tooth, enamel with oxygen isotopes that reflect cold drinking water, and then there's the behavioral evidence, nesting sites, social herding, and body insulation. Put it all together, and the answer is clear. Yes, some dinosaurs did live in snowy conditions. And they did it well. Why does this matter? Because it shatters the myth. It tells us that dinosaurs weren't just creatures of heat, light, and lush jungles. They were dynamic, resilient, capable of adapting to extremes. Much like the birds they became, understanding polar dinosaurs helps us see just how versatile life can be. It forces us to reimagine ecosystems where the ground crunched with frost under giant feet, where feathered tails swayed through snowy underbrush, and where dinosaur calls echoed through icy twilight forests. And in that reimagining, we see something deeper, that life, even 100 million years ago, found ways to thrive where it wasn't supposed to. The cold-blooded myth melts away if dinosaurs could live in snow, if they had feathers, if they raised their young, lived in families, and braved the cold. Then they weren't the simple, mindless monsters we once thought. They were complex, intelligent, and adaptable. And if they could survive in places like the ancient Arctic, who's to say they wouldn't still be here today, had that asteroid never struck? Chapter 9. The Truth About Sauropods. Giants, but gentle. There's something undeniably awe-inspiring about the long-necked giants of the Mesozoic, sauropods, the biggest animals to ever walk the earth. They didn't roar or slash or run. They didn't need to, because when you're over 80 feet long, your very presence is power. But here's the catch. These weren't mindless, plodding behemoths like old movies would have you believe. They weren't lumbering tanks with brains the size of walnuts. In fact, what we now know about sauropods paints a picture that's far more surprising, and in many ways, far more profound. Because these titans of the earth weren't just giants. They were gentle, they were social, and they were among the most successful creatures to ever live. Let's explore the truth behind the giants and uncover what made them so incredible. The classic image of a sauropod is almost mythic. A brontosaurus, wading through a swamp, neck raised like a giraffe, tail dragging behind. It's peaceful, slow, maybe even a little dim. But the reality was nothing like that. For starters, these animals weren't stuck in the water to support their own weight, as once believed. They thrived on land, from dry plains to forest edges, moving with surprising grace for animals that could weigh as much as a dozen elephants. Their skeletons, incredibly lightweight for their size, were marvels of engineering. Air sacs within their bones reduced their weight. Hollow spaces in their vertebrae kept their spines flexible and strong, while their necks could span over 30 feet, longer than a city bus. And yet, their heads were small, their teeth simple, and their brains surprisingly efficient. Take Apatosaurus, or Diplodocus, or the famous Brachiosaurus, which may have lifted its head over 40 feet into the air. These weren't just oversized lizards. They were biological wonders, shaped by evolution to fill a role no other creature could. So how did they manage their massive bodies? For one thing, sauropods likely had very efficient metabolisms. Their huge size helped them retain heat, a trait known as gigantothermy. It meant they didn't need to eat constantly, but when they did, they could consume hundreds of pounds of vegetation in a single day. Their teeth weren't made for chewing. Instead, they stripped leaves and vegetation, swallowing food whole. Their long digestive systems, likely aided by fermentation, broke it all down slowly over time. Much like cows with multiple stomachs, but unlike cows, they didn't chew cud. In fact, some scientists think they may have swallowed stones, gastroliths, to help grind food inside their stomachs. Much like modern birds, their long necks weren't just for reaching tall trees, either. That's the movie version. In truth, many sauropods probably swept their necks side to side, grazing wide patches of ground, vegetation without having to move their entire bodies. And this made them efficient, able to clear entire fields of ferns or low shrubs while standing almost still. But what's even more fascinating is what we're learning about their social behavior. Fossil trackways show that sauropods traveled in herds, some small, some enormous. And in many cases, juveniles walked in the center, Protected by adults. This tells us something incredibly human. They cared for their young, they moved as families, and they likely communicated with each other through deep rumbles, vibrations, and body language, much like elephants today. In fact, their long necks and tails might have even acted like resonators, helping transmit low-frequency sounds over vast distances. Imagine that, a prehistoric savanna echoing with the deep, seismic calls of sauropods, rolling through the trees like distant thunder. Gentle giants, yes, but giants with presence, with purpose. Now, it's easy to assume that being huge made them invincible, and in many ways, it did. Few predators would dare attack a fully grown Argentinosaurus, which could weigh over 90 tons. That's more than 13 African elephants combined. But their young were vulnerable. And for that reason, sauropods likely laid hundreds of eggs at a time, scattering them across nesting grounds. Fossilized nests show this strategy wasn't careless, it was calculated. Spread out, minimize loss, ensure survival. Because even if only a few survive each season, it was enough to keep the herd going, and that herd was unstoppable. Sauropods weren't just big. They were everywhere, from North America to South America, Africa to Asia, Europe to Australia. Their fossils span the globe. And they reigned for over 100 million years. Let that sink in. Human civilization has existed for about 10,000 years. Sauropods ruled Earth for 10,000 times longer. And they did it without claws, without fangs, without aggression. They did it through scale, strategy, and adaptation. Even today, the mystery of their size still fascinates scientists. No land animal has ever come close since. And probably never will. Why not? Because sauropods were the perfect storm. The right atmospheric conditions, high oxygen levels, a world full of lush vegetation, few limits, and an evolutionary pathway that produced living skyscrapers. But as powerful as they were, they couldn't escape the end. Like all non-avian dinosaurs, they vanished after the asteroid impact, 66 million years ago. Yet their legacy lingers in the ground beneath our feet, in the bones that stretch across museums, in the awe that fills us when we look up at something too big to comprehend, and perhaps, in a more subtle way, in our love for the majestic, the mysterious, and the gentle giants among us. Because sauropods show us that greatness doesn't always come with violence. Sometimes it comes with stillness, with endurance, with simply being so immense that the world bends around you. They weren't monsters, they were monuments, and they left their footprints not just in rock, but in the way we imagine what life can be. Chapter 10, Dinosaurs that could swim like crocodiles. Imagine a dinosaur cutting through the water like a crocodile. Long tail swaying side to side, arms tucked close, a ridge of spines trailing behind like a dorsal sail. This isn't fantasy. It's Spinosaurus aegyptiacus, one of the most bizarre, misunderstood, and now revolutionary predators ever discovered. And it didn't just dip its toes in the water. It was built for it. For decades, paleontologists believed dinosaurs were strictly terrestrial animals. Birds could fly, sure, and pterosaurs ruled the skies, but swimming dinosaurs? That was hard to imagine. Then came Spinosaurus at over 50 feet long. It was longer than T-Rex, possibly the largest carnivorous dinosaur ever. But it wasn't just its size that stunned researchers. It was its entire design. Elongated jaws, packed with conical teeth, perfect for grabbing slippery prey. Nostrils positioned further back on the snout, so it could breathe while partially submerged. Dense limb bones, reducing buoyancy, just like modern diving animals. And most striking of all, a tail built not like a land predator's, but like a paddle. In 2020, a newly discovered tail fossil changed everything. It revealed long, flat vertebrae that expanded outward, forming a broad, fin-like structure perfect for propulsion in water. It was the kind of tail you'd expect on an aquatic lizard. Not a dinosaur. Suddenly, Spinosaurus wasn't a strange land predator with weird proportions. It was a semi-aquatic hunter, probably the first known dinosaur built to swim, and not just wade. Not just chase fish at the shoreline, but actually move through water using its tail, stalking rivers and lagoons like a prehistoric alligator on steroids. For the first time, paleontologists had solid fossil-based evidence of a dinosaur that had adapted for life in the water, not just around it. But Spinosaurus wasn't alone. Fossils of other dinosaurs have shown hints of aquatic behavior too. Baryonyx, a close cousin of Spinosaurus, had similar jaws and fish scales fossilized in its stomach, evidence of a fish-heavy diet. It lived in what is now England, near ancient rivers and lakes. Its curved claws may have helped it hook slippery prey, while its long snout worked like a heron's bill, snapping fish from the shallows. Then there's Suchomimus, another Spinosaurid from Africa. Though it lacked the massive sail of Spinosaurus, its entire build suggested a semi-aquatic lifestyle, with adaptations for hunting fish and likely wading into wetlands. Even smaller, more traditional-looking theropods like Coelophysis have been found in what used to be riverbeds and lake margins, and though they weren't aquatic per se, some may have been opportunistic swimmers. Tracks from sites in China show dinosaur footprints transitioning into swim marks, suggesting these animals sometimes walked into deeper water and paddled across. Why does this matter? Because it shatters the myth. It tells us that dinosaurs weren't just creatures of heat, light, and lush jungles. They were dynamic, resilient, capable of adapting to extremes, much like the birds they became. Understanding polar dinosaurs helps us see just how versatile life can be. It forces us to reimagine ecosystems where the ground crunched with frost under giant feet, where feathered tails swayed through snowy underbrush, and where dinosaur calls echoed through icy twilight forests. And in that reimagining, we see something deeper, that life, even 100 million years ago, found ways to thrive where it wasn't supposed to. The cold-blooded myth melts away if dinosaurs could live in snow, if they had feathers, if they raised their young, lived in families, and braved the cold. Then they weren't the simple, mindless monsters we once thought. They were complex, intelligent, and adaptable. And if they could survive in places like the ancient Arctic, who's to say they wouldn't still be here today, had that asteroid never struck? Chapter 9. The Truth About Sauropods. Giants, but gentle. There's something undeniably awe-inspiring about the long-necked giants of the Mesozoic, sauropods, the biggest animals to ever walk the earth. They didn't roar or slash or run. They didn't need to, because when you're over 80 feet long, your very presence is power. But here's the catch. These weren't mindless, plodding behemoths like old movies would have you believe. They weren't lumbering tanks with brains the size of walnuts. In fact, what we now know about sauropods paints a picture that's far more surprising, and in many ways, far more profound. Because these titans of the earth weren't just giants. They were gentle, they were social, and they were among the most successful creatures to ever live. Let's explore the truth behind the giants and uncover what made them so incredible. The classic image of a sauropod is almost mythic, a brontosaurus, wading through a swamp, neck raised like a giraffe, tail dragging behind. It's peaceful, slow, maybe even a little dim, but the reality was nothing like that. For starters, these animals weren't stuck in the water to support their own weight, as once believed. They thrived on land, from dry plains to forest edges, moving with surprising grace for animals that could weigh as much as a dozen elephants. Their skeletons, incredibly lightweight for their size, were marvels of engineering. Air sacs within their bones reduced their weight. Hollow spaces in their vertebrae kept their spines flexible and strong, while their necks could span over 30 feet, longer than a city bus. And yet, their heads were small, their teeth simple, and their brains surprisingly efficient. Take Apatosaurus, or Diplodocus, or the famous Brachiosaurus, which may have lifted its head over 40 feet into the air. These weren't just oversized lizards, they were biological wonders, shaped by evolution to fill a role no other creature could dot. So how did they manage their massive bodies? For one thing, sauropods likely had very efficient metabolisms. Their huge size helped them retain heat, a trait known as gigantothermy. It meant they didn't need to eat constantly, but when they did, they could consume hundreds of pounds of vegetation in a single day. Their teeth weren't made for chewing. Instead, they stripped leaves and vegetation, swallowing food whole. Their long digestive systems, likely aided by fermentation, broke it all down slowly over time. Much like cows with multiple stomachs, but unlike cows, they didn't chew cud. In fact, some scientists think they may have swallowed stones, gastroliths, to help grind food inside their stomachs. Much like modern birds, their long necks weren't just for reaching tall trees either. That's the movie version. In truth, many sauropods probably swept their necks side to side, grazing wide patches of ground, vegetation without having to move their entire bodies, and this made them efficient, able to clear entire fields of ferns or low shrubs while standing almost still. But what's even more fascinating is what we're learning about their social behavior. Fossil trackways show that sauropods traveled in herds, some small, some enormous, and in many cases, juveniles walked in the center, protected by adults. This tells us something incredibly human. They cared for their young, they moved as families, and they likely communicated with each other through deep rumbles, vibrations, and body language, much like elephants today. In fact, their long necks and tails might have even acted like resonators, helping transmit low-frequency sounds over vast distances. Imagine that, a prehistoric savanna echoing with the deep, seismic calls of sauropods rolling through the trees like distant thunder. Gentle giants, yes, but giants with presence, with purpose. Now, it's easy to assume that being huge made them invincible, and in many ways, it did. Few predators would dare attack a fully grown Argentinosaurus, which could weigh over 90 tons. That's more than 13 African elephants combined. But their young were vulnerable. And for that reason, sauropods likely laid hundreds of eggs at a time, scattering them across nesting grounds. Fossilized nests show this strategy wasn't careless. It was calculated. Spread out, minimize loss, ensure survival. Because even if only a few survived each season, it was enough to keep the herd going, and that herd was unstoppable. Sauropods weren't just big. They were everywhere. From North America to South America, Africa to Asia, Europe to Australia, their fossils span the globe. And they reigned for over 100 million years. Let that sink in. Human civilization has existed for about 10,000 years. Sauropods ruled Earth for 10,000 times longer, and they did it without claws, without fangs, without aggression. They did it through scale, strategy, and adaptation. Even today, the mystery of their size still fascinates scientists. No land animal has ever come close since, and probably never will. Why not? Because sauropods were the perfect storm. The right atmospheric conditions, high oxygen levels, a world full of lush vegetation, few limits, and an evolutionary pathway that produced living skyscrapers. But as powerful as they were, they couldn't escape the end. Like all non-avian dinosaurs, they vanished after the asteroid impact, 66 million years ago, yet their legacy lingers in the ground beneath our feet, in the bones that stretch across museums, in the awe that fills us when we look up at something too big to comprehend, and perhaps, in a more subtle way, in our love for the majestic, the mysterious, and the gentle giants among us. Because sauropods show us that greatness doesn't always come with violence. Sometimes it comes with stillness, with endurance, with simply being so immense that the world bends around you. They weren't monsters, they were monuments, and they left their footprints not just in rock, but in the way we imagine what life can be. Chapter 10. Dinosaurs that could swim like crocodiles. Imagine a dinosaur cutting through the water like a crocodile. Long tail swaying side to side, arms tucked close. A ridge of spines trailing behind like a dorsal sail. This isn't fantasy. It's Spinosaurus aegyptiacus, one of the most bizarre, misunderstood, and now revolutionary predators ever discovered. And it didn't just dip its toes in the water. It was built for it. For decades, paleontologists believed dinosaurs were strictly terrestrial animals. Birds could fly, sure, and pterosaurs ruled the skies. But swimming dinosaurs? That was hard to imagine. Then came Spinosaurus at over 50 feet long. It was longer than T-Rex, possibly the largest carnivorous dinosaur ever. But it wasn't just its size that stunned researchers. It was its entire design. Elongated jaws, packed with conical teeth, perfect for grabbing slippery prey. Nostrils positioned further back on the snout, so it could breathe while partially submerged. Dense limb bones, reducing buoyancy, just like modern diving animals. And most striking of all, a tail built not like a land predator's, but like a paddle. In 2020, a newly discovered tail fossil changed everything. It revealed long, flat vertebrae that expanded outward, forming a broad, fin-like structure perfect for propulsion in water. It was the kind of tail you'd expect on an aquatic lizard, not a dinosaur. Suddenly, Spinosaurus wasn't a strange land predator with weird proportions. It was a semi-aquatic hunter, probably the first known dinosaur built to swim, and not just wade. Not just chase fish at the shoreline, but actually move through water using its tail, stalking rivers and lagoons like a prehistoric alligator on steroids. For the first time, paleontologists had solid, fossil-based evidence of a dinosaur that had adapted for life in the water, not just around it. But Spinosaurus wasn't alone. Fossils of other dinosaurs have shown hints of aquatic behavior too. Baryonyx, a close cousin of Spinosaurus, had similar jaws and fish scales fossilized in its stomach, evidence of a fish-heavy diet. It lived in what is now England, near ancient rivers and lakes. Its curved claws may have helped it hook slippery prey, while its long snout worked like a heron's bill, snapping fish from the shallows. Then there's Suchomimus, another Spinosaurid from Africa. Though it lacked the massive sail of Spinosaurus, its entire build suggested a semi-aquatic lifestyle, with adaptations for hunting fish and likely wading into wetlands. Even smaller, more traditional-looking theropods like Coelophysis have been found in what used to be riverbeds and lake margins, and though they weren't aquatic per se, some may have been opportunistic swimmers. Tracks from sites in China show dinosaur footprints transitioning into swim marks, suggesting these animals sometimes walked into deeper water and paddled across. Here, Apatosaurus, Diplodocus, and Brachiosaurus all roamed in herds. Massive sauropods, some the size of buildings, slowly made their way across floodplains and river valleys, feeding on different types of vegetation. Brachiosaurus, with its upright neck, likely browsed on treetops. Diplodocus, with its long, low neck, swept through low ferns and shrubs. Each fed in different layers, avoiding competition and maximizing resources. Living among them were Stegosaurus, armored and defensive, munching on tough undergrowth. Small, fleet-footed ornitholestes and Dryosaurus darted through the shadows, avoiding predators and scavenging scraps. And speaking of predators, there was one that ruled them all. This apex carnivore, about 30 feet long, was fast, agile, and deadly. It didn't have the crushing bite of a T-Rex, but it didn't need it. With sharp, serrated teeth and massive claws, Allosaurus likely attacked in ambushes, striking soft tissue, weakening prey with slashes and letting them bleed out. Think of a pack of lions around a herd of buffalo. That was the Jurassic Plains. Tension, caution, constant movement. But the Morrison Formation isn't the only window into prehistoric communities. On the other side of the world, in what is now China, the Yixian Formation paints a completely different picture. This was early Cretaceous China, around 125 million years ago. A lush, forested landscape dotted with lakes, and perhaps most significantly, the place where feathers started to take center stage. Here, Microraptor glided between trees. Not quite a bird, but not just a dinosaur either. It had wings. Not just on its arms, but on its legs. Four-limbed flight, or at least controlled falling. It hunted small animals and insects, possibly even fish. Alongside it lived Utaranus, a feathered tyrannosaur nearly 30 feet long, much earlier than T-Rex and coated in down-like feathers. It was the first hint that even giant predators could be fuzzy. The Yixian Formation also gave us Psittacosaurus, a small, beaked herbivore that may have lived in groups and showed signs of parental care. Fossils have been found with juveniles, clustered around an adult, suggesting strong family bonds. This was a complex ecosystem, with creatures climbing, flying, swimming, and running. It wasn't just raptors and T-Rexes, it was birds in transition, mammals starting to rise, insects buzzing through ancient forests. Then there's the Hell Creek Formation, a window into the very end of the dinosaur age, about 66 million years ago, just before the asteroid impact. This is the world T-Rex actually lived in. Here, you'd find Triceratops, not a slow tank but a dynamic, herd-dwelling herbivore with social behaviors and serious horns. You'd find Edmontosaurus, a massive hadrosaur that likely migrated seasonally, communicating through low-pitched calls from its giant nasal passages. Anzu Wiley, the so-called chicken from hell, ran across these lands too, a strange, bird-like omnivore with feathers, claws, and a bizarre crest. Possibly a nest raider, possibly a scavenger, possibly both. And then there was T-Rex, the top predator, yes, but not the mindless killer movies make it out to be. In fact, fossils show that T-Rex didn't just hunt. It likely scavenged too. It used smell more than sight, relying on a massive olfactory bulb in its brain. It may have mated for life. It may have protected its young. This wasn't a monster. It was a monarch, one that lived in a thriving, dangerous, competitive world right up to the end. The truth is, dinosaurs didn't live in a vacuum. They weren't solitary giants stuck in empty landscapes. They were part of dynamic ecosystems, each with its own cast of characters: apex predators, armored tanks, nervous prey, scavengers, tree climbers, swimmers, flyers, and more. They lived in herds, in flocks, in family units. They migrated, nested, defended territories, raised offspring. And they evolved side by side, constantly shaping each other's behaviors, diets, and survival strategies. Even in the fossil record you can see this interconnectedness. Bite marks on bones, fossilized footprints crossing paths, entire death sites where multiple species lie together, caught by droughts, floods, or volcanic ash. If you really want a Jurassic Park, it isn't about shoving every famous dinosaur into the same exhibit. It's about capturing the real prehistoric drama, how species coexisted, adapted to one another, and filled every corner of the planet. And what's truly incredible, this story isn't just ancient history. It's still unfolding. Every year, paleontologists dig up new formations, uncover new fossils, rewrite entire chapters of dinosaur science. And with each new discovery, we get closer to understanding not just who lived with whom, but how. Because the real Jurassic Park wasn't an island. It was Earth, wild, dangerous, crowded, and constantly changing. And in many ways, it still is. Chapter 13. Dinosaurs with super senses. Imagine standing in a Cretaceous forest. You're quiet, still, hidden, but something knows you're there. Not because it saw you move, not because it heard you breathing, but because it smelled you. Long before you even noticed it was watching, it had already locked in on your scent, carried by the breeze, mapped in its brain like a trail of smoke. And that brain? It wasn't the brain of a dull predator or dim-witted reptile. It was built for tracking, for sensing, for hunting. Welcome to the world of dinosaurs that didn't need brute force, because they had superpowers of perception. Let's start with the most obvious contender. Tyrannosaurus rex. Yes, it had massive jaws. Yes, it could crush bone. But perhaps the most underrated weapon in its arsenal was its nose. Paleontologists studying T-Rex skulls discovered something astonishing. It had an enormous olfactory bulb, the part of the brain dedicated to smell. In fact, it was one of the largest ever seen in any terrestrial vertebrate. This wasn't just about sniffing food. It was about detecting prey, sensing danger, tracking scent trails over miles, even distinguishing between individuals. In other words, T-Rex didn't just smell like a dog. It smelled better than most modern carnivores. It could probably smell a carcass from across the plain, or pick up the scent of a herd long before seeing them. Then there's sight. Contrary to the old idea that T-Rex had poor vision, recent studies suggest the opposite. The forward-facing eyes gave it binocular vision, similar to birds of prey, meaning it had depth perception. It could judge distance. And thanks to its large optic lobes, it likely saw movement with extreme clarity. The whole, if you don't move, it can't see you myth, completely debunked. If anything, standing still would just make you easier to hit. But T-Rex wasn't the only dinosaur with enhanced senses. Let's talk about Trudon, a small, bird-like predator often overlooked in favor of bigger names. But this little creature had one of the largest brain-to-body ratios of any known dinosaur. That means it was smart, agile, alert. Its eyes were huge relative to its skull, and positioned more forward than sideways, again, suggesting strong depth perception. Fossil evidence shows that some Trudon species lived in polar regions during months of extended darkness, which means they had to navigate and hunt with limited light. Their vision wasn't just sharp, it was adapted for low light, possibly even night vision. Imagine a sleek predator moving silently through twilight, spotting you not with movement, but with the faint shimmer of your heat or breath. Then there's Therizinosaurus, the bizarre, pot-bellied, feathered herbivore with giant claws. Its senses remain a mystery, but its elongated skull and potentially wide field of view suggest it needed strong vision, not to hunt, but to avoid being hunted. It might have used its senses to scan for danger, or maybe even communicate visually with others of its kind. Those feathers weren't just insulation. They may have been for display, color, movement, recognition, which brings us to another overlooked dinosaur sense: hearing. Many hadrosaurs, the so-called duck-billed dinosaurs, had elaborate crests on their heads, like Parasaurolophus. For a long time, no one knew what they were for. Then, with the help of computer modeling and CT scans, scientists recreated the internal structure of the crest and realized it could work like a resonating chamber. These dinosaurs weren't just silent grazers. They sang, their crests amplified. Sound deep, foghorn-like calls that could carry over long distances, maybe to warn others, maybe to attract mates, maybe just to say, "I'm here." Their hearing was likely tuned to these low frequencies, meaning they could pick up calls from miles away. Even today, animals like elephants and whales use low-frequency sounds to communicate over vast distances. Hadrosaurs may have done the same. Prehistoric foghorns echoing across the swamps. And what about touch? While it's harder to detect in fossils, skin impressions from some dinosaurs show feathers, scales, even nerve-rich tissue. Dinosaurs like Anchiornis had complex feathers with asymmetrical veins, suggesting they weren't just for flight, but for tactile feedback. Two-dot feathers could help feel wind currents, detect changes in pressure, help parents recognize chicks, or warn a sleeping dinosaur when a predator got too close. In many ways, the sensory world of dinosaurs was far richer, far more active than we ever gave them credit for. We used to see them as dumb, clumsy reptiles. Now we know they were aware, sensitive, and often sharp beyond belief. They could smell prey in the dark, see movement in near silence, hear each other across valleys, and sense changes in their environment faster than most mammals ever could. These weren't cold-blooded monsters. They were tuned to their world in ways we're only beginning to understand. Just imagine what it was like to be a small dinosaur trying to survive in a world where predators could smell you before you took your first step, see you through the ferns before you even looked up, hear your footsteps across damp forest floor. Super senses weren't a luxury. They were life and death. And in the evolutionary arms race, dinosaurs didn't just grow bigger teeth. They built better sensors. Chapter 14. Feathers, Fur, and Skin. What dinosaurs really looked like for over a century. We pictured dinosaurs as leather-skinned giants, scaly, gray, drab, and bare. The lizard kings of Earth. Museums filled dioramas with green and brown beasts, their hides cracked and ridged like modern reptiles. Movies cemented the image. Cold-blooded monsters covered in scales, thundering through steaming jungles. But that image? It's collapsing. Fossil by fossil, flake by flake, we're learning something completely different. Dinosaurs came in textures, colors, and coverings that we never dreamed of, and some of them were downright flamboyant. Because for many dinosaurs, the story didn't stop at bone. It continued in feathers, filaments, protofuzz, and in rare cases, even preserved pigment. Their skin wasn't always dull and gray. Some may have been striped, spotted, or iridescent. They weren't scaly lizards. They were vibrant, dynamic creatures. Some were sleek, some were shaggy. Some may have had patches of scales on one side and a fuzz-covered ridge on the other. Nature was experimenting, and the fossil record is finally letting us see it. It all started with a few strange imprints, ghostly outlines in fine-grained stone around small raptor fossils in China. At first, paleontologists thought it was fluff. Then they realized these were feathers. Not impressions of skin, but actual filaments arranged along the arms and tail, sometimes even showing barbs and veins. This wasn't just a bird thing. These were non-avian dinosaurs, Velociraptor, Microraptor, Anchiornis. Suddenly, the whole concept of dinosaur skin had to be rewritten. And it didn't stop with the small ones. Yutyrannus, a 30-foot-long tyrannosaur from China, was covered in a coat of shaggy feathers, a predator bigger than a car, with insulation like a giant prehistoric wolf. If this relative of T-Rex had feathers, could the king himself have been fuzzy too? Maybe not fully, but possibly as a juvenile or in certain regions of the body. And while not all dinosaurs had feathers, many likely had some kind of covering beyond scales. Even herbivores like Culindadromus, not traditionally bird-like, were found with feathery patches, leading scientists to believe that feathers may have evolved far earlier than we thought. Maybe not for flight, but for warmth, or even display. And in rare cases, the color of these feathers can be deciphered using microscopic analysis of pigment cells called melanosomes. Paleontologists have reconstructed the likely colors of ancient dinosaurs: black and white, fiery reds, metallic blues. One dinosaur, Anchiornis, may have looked like a prehistoric magpie: black crust, white body, and fiery red feathers on its head. The age of gray monsters is over. The age of color, fluff, and pattern is here. Chapter 15. The Shrinking Giants. Why dinosaurs got smaller. We tend to think of dinosaurs as titans, long-necked behemoths shaking the earth, monstrous predators stalking the plains. And yes, for millions of years, some species were absolutely massive. But here's something most people don't realize. By the end of the age of dinosaurs, many of them had gotten smaller. Not just slightly, some had shrunk dramatically. Why? What could make evolution trade colossal size for compact bodies? The answer lies in survival, adaptation, and one of the most important transformations in Earth's history, the rise of birds. Because when dinosaurs began to shrink, they weren't dying off. They were changing. They were becoming something new. And that shift didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, step-by-step reshaping of the dinosaur blueprint. From ground-stomping giants to agile, feathered flyers, paleontologists call this process miniaturization. It wasn't just random downsizing, it was a survival strategy. Smaller animals need fewer resources. They can hide, climb, and escape danger more easily. As ecosystems changed, forests spreading, temperatures shifting, new predators emerging, smaller body sizes offered new opportunities. You could nest in trees, hunt smaller prey, evade larger threats. In fact, the dinosaur lineage that gave rise to birds, the Maniraptorans, began shrinking over tens of millions of years, well before flight ever took off. Fossils show that bones became lighter, skulls thinner, and arms longer relative to body size. Feathers, first used for warmth or display, eventually became aerodynamically useful. It wasn't one big leap, it was a staircase. And those that made it to the top, they survived the extinction. When the asteroid hit 66 million years ago, wiping out most of the large dinosaurs, it was the small, adaptable ones, those that had already embraced their size, their feathers, their flexibility, that made it through. That's why when you look outside and see a pigeon or a hawk, you're not just seeing a bird. You're seeing a survivor. A dinosaur that shrank itself to survive a world that was changing. The giants fell. The small ones flew. And in doing so, they inherited the Earth. Chapter 16. Baby dinosaurs were nothing like the adults. We've long imagined dinosaurs as towering, roaring giants. But what we often forget, and what science has only recently begun to truly unravel, is that every one of those titans began as something small, soft, and vulnerable. Baby dinosaurs weren't just mini versions of the adults we see in museum halls or on movie screens. In many cases, they looked like entirely different creatures, different proportions, different behaviors, even different ecologies. And this wasn't just a biological quirk, it was a survival strategy. A way to live and grow in a world full of predators, extremes, and competition. Let's start at the beginning. The egg. Dinosaur eggs came in all shapes and sizes, from grapefruit-sized orbs to elongated football-like forms, depending on the phyla species. But more than their shape, it's the content that astonishes paleontologists today. Inside fossilized eggs, scientists have discovered exquisite details, even the curled skeletons of developing embryos. In a few rare cases, they found the actual skin texture of unborn dinosaurs. One particularly mind-blowing find in China revealed a nearly complete oviraptorosaur embryo, perfectly preserved in a curled, bird-like pose, its head tucked under its wing-like arm, just like a modern chick before hatching. That's more than coincidence. That's a behavior that modern birds inherited directly from their dinosaur ancestors. Once hatched, things changed quickly. For many dinosaurs, the baby stage was not only physically distinct, it was ecologically separate. They didn't compete with the adults. They filled their own niche. Take sauropods, the long-necked giants like Apatosaurus or Rapatosaurus. Adults were simply too massive to hide or move through dense forests, but juveniles? They were much smaller, faster, and could forage in environments where their parents couldn't go. Their limbs were proportionally longer, their heads rounder, and their bones lighter. In Madagascar, fossils of Rapatosaurus hatchlings show a completely different limb structure than the adults, suggesting they were far more mobile and independent than previously believed. They likely wandered off on their own, possibly even forming small juvenile groups for safety. Compare this to the duck-billed hadrosaurs, like Maiasaura. This dinosaur, whose name literally means good mother lizard, has revolutionized our understanding of dinosaur parenting. In Montana's Badlands, entire nesting grounds have been discovered. Thousands of eggs, many broken open, with the tiny skeletons of juveniles inside. But these weren't hatch-and-run babies. The bones were soft, fragile, and underdeveloped. The hatchlings couldn't walk or feed themselves. That means they relied on their parents. Fossils of different sized. Juveniles around the nests suggest the young stayed for weeks, maybe even months, before leaving. And that implies social structure. Adults guarding the nests, feeding the babies, teaching them. That's not reptilian behavior. That's bird-like, even mammalian, and it wasn't limited to herbivores. Let's revisit Tarbosaurus, the close cousin of T-Rex. In recent years, juvenile fossils have given us something remarkable: evidence of ontogenetic niche shifting. That's a fancy term for what's actually a brilliant survival trick. Young Tarbosaurus didn't compete with adults. They hunted different prey. Juveniles had narrower jaws, faster legs, and a build suited for speed and precision. Adults, meanwhile, had deeper skulls and crushing bites, optimized for taking down massive herbivores. By splitting the job, by changing as they grew, they avoided competition with themselves. It's nature's way of optimizing every stage of life. And then there's the identity crisis in dinosaur taxonomy, because juvenile dinosaurs sometimes look so unlike their adult forms that paleontologists misclassified them entirely. Take Dracorex hogwartsia, a flat-headed horned dinosaur named after the Harry Potter universe. For years, it was thought to be a unique species. Then came Stygimoloch, another spiky, odd-looking creature. But as more fossils were found, something became clear. These were young versions of Pachycephalosaurus. As they matured, their skulls thickened, their spikes shrank or fused, and their shape changed dramatically. The same animal, different age, completely different appearance. And this confusion isn't rare. Paleontologists now estimate that some species may not be separate at all, but just growth stages of known dinosaurs. That means the true number of distinct dinosaur species might be smaller than we think, and our understanding of their diversity is still evolving. But perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of baby dinosaurs is what they felt like. Thanks to rare fossil beds, we now have direct impressions of their skin, and in some cases, feathers. Juvenile Psittacosaurus, a small parrot-beaked dinosaur, was found in a fossil that preserved soft tissue and even bristles on its tail, almost like quills. What were they for? Maybe protection, maybe display, or perhaps even camouflage. Young dinosaurs, after all, needed to hide from predators. In one stunning study, scientists analyzed the melanosomes, the microscopic pigment structures, in Psittacosaurus fossilized skin. What they found was astonishing. This baby dinosaur likely had countershading, with a lighter belly and darker back, just like modern deer or rabbits. That's the kind of camouflage designed for forest habitats. The kind that keeps you alive when everything wants to eat you. And what about their behavior? Were dinosaur babies playful? Did they interact the way young animals do today? While behavior doesn't fossilize, there are tantalizing clues. Nest fossils show multiple juveniles together, suggesting not just family structures, but perhaps group cohesion. Some scientists have proposed that baby hadrosaurs or ceratopsians may have formed creches, groups of young raised communally, like penguin nurseries. Adults could forage while the young were protected in numbers. There are even fossilized Footprints showing tracks of multiple juveniles walking in parallel. Coordinated, side by side, not randomly scattered. That kind of behavior suggests memory, awareness, possibly even rudimentary social learning. In some species, babies may have even looked cuter on purpose. It's a phenomenon called neoteny, the retention of juvenile features to elicit care. From adults, think of a puppy's big eyes, round face, or clumsy movements. Some juvenile dinosaurs, especially theropods, had enlarged eyes, shorter snouts, and more upright postures. These traits may have helped trigger nurturing behavior, not just from parents, but perhaps from entire social groups. After all, in a world filled with predators, the best defense for a baby dinosaur wasn't claws or armor. It was protection. And then there's the biggest mystery of all. What were baby raptors like? We've seen the adult velociraptor, fast, agile, deadly. But baby raptors? They were likely fluffy, delicate, and wide-eyed. They hatched with feathers. They had to be quick learners. They may have practiced hunting through play, like lion. Cubs, some may have chirped to their parents, just as baby birds do today. In fact, fossils of oviraptors show adults found atop nests in a brooding position, wings outstretched, just like a bird incubating eggs. The link between dinosaur parenting and modern bird behavior is more than strong. It's unmistakable. So why does all this matter? Because it tells us that dinosaurs weren't simple reptiles driven by instinct alone. They grew, they changed. They lived in stages just like mammals, just like birds. From fragile hatchlings to bold juveniles to towering adults, they occupied different roles at different points in life. That means their lives were dynamic, strategic, and deeply shaped by time, growth, and experience. It also means our vision of dinosaurs as rigid, unchanging monsters has to go. Because in truth, they weren't monsters, they were living things, with families, with instincts, with transformations as dramatic as any metamorphosis on Earth. They were born, they struggled, and they grew, each stage more fascinating than the last. And if we really want to understand them, we can't just look at the fossils of the full-grown giants. We need to start at the nest. Chapter 17. The dinosaur mummies, skin, muscles, and last moments. Preserved fossils are usually bones, hard, mineralized. Remains stripped of skin, muscle, and everything that made the animal feel alive. We study their skeletons, reconstruct their shapes, and make educated guesses about how they looked. But every so often, rarely, almost miraculously, nature gives us a gift. A fossil that doesn't just preserve the bones, but the skin, the muscles, the tissue, the outlines. In some cases, even the contents of the stomach. These aren't just fossils. They're mummies, time travelers. The closest we'll ever get to seeing a real dinosaur. Not just imagined, but preserved in the flesh. One of the most breathtaking examples of this was discovered in 1999 in North Dakota. A fossilized Edmontosaurus, a duck-billed dinosaur, was uncovered in such pristine condition that paleontologists could see not just its bones, but the actual texture of its skin, with pebbly scales wrapping around its arms, legs, and tail. Muscle still clung to bone. The contours of the body were intact. Even the tendons in the tail had been preserved, showing how the tail was held stiff, likely acting as a counterbalance while walking. This wasn't just a reconstruction. It was an animal caught in time. They called it the Dakota mummy. And it forever changed how we visualize dinosaurs. Before discoveries like this, skin was always a guess, based on scale impressions from footprints or tiny fragments. But now, we could see it stretched over limbs. We could map where the scales were larger or smaller. In some places, skin impressions showed creases and folds, like those around a real, living joint. We weren't just seeing the animal's anatomy. We were seeing how it moved, how its skin shifted, how it flexed, stretched, or wrinkled. This level of detail allowed scientists to estimate muscle mass with much greater accuracy, and suddenly, previous speed or weight estimates needed adjustment. We'd been guessing. These mummies were answering, and Edmontosaurus wasn't alone. In 2000, another incredible find stunned the scientific world, a Brachylophosaurus mummy known as Leonardo. What made Leonardo so special wasn't just the skin, though that was stunning, it was the gut contents. That's right, paleontologists found the actual partially digested contents of Leonardo's last meal. Not just bones or plant fragments, but cellular structures of leaves, evidence of ferns, conifers, and flowering plants. We now had direct proof of what this dinosaur actually ate, not just what we assumed based on teeth or jaw shape. And around the gut, scientists discovered tiny fossilized parasites, likely intestinal worms. That's biology, behavior, and ecosystem all wrapped up in one fossil. A moment in time, frozen inside the body of a creature that hadn't walked the Earth in 77 million years. Other mummies have preserved even more subtle features, things we didn't even think possible. Fossils of Psittacosaurus, for instance, preserved not just skin, but the pattern of color along its body. Scientists discovered evidence of countershading, lighter underbellies and darker backs, the kind of camouflage modern deer and lizards used to blend into dappled light. It wasn't just artistic guesswork, it was data. Proof that dinosaurs didn't just move and eat, they hid, they strategized. They adapted to their environments with behaviors and appearances remarkably similar to today's animals. And then there are the tragic ones. Some mummified fossils capture something more haunting, the exact position of death. One of the most famous is the ceratopsian known as the sleeping dragon, a Psittacosaurus fossil preserved in a curled, resting pose, as if dozing under a tree. The arms tucked in, the tail curled around its body, its head resting gently on the ground. But this wasn't sleep, this was a final moment, flash frozen by a sudden catastrophe. Likely a volcanic eruption or sandstorm buried the dinosaur in seconds, preserving it with minimal disturbance. What you're looking at isn't just a skeleton, it's a death pose. A last breath recorded in stone. Even predators have been captured this way. The famous fighting dinosaurs fossil from Mongolia preserves a velociraptor and a protoceratops locked in combat, one clawing, the other biting, both caught mid-battle as a sand dune collapsed over them. Skin impressions have been found around both animals, further cementing the idea that they died exactly as they were found, in a struggle for life, in the heart of the Cretaceous. But how do these mummies happen? What kind of conditions can preserve flesh and skin for over 70 million years? The answer: extreme luck and rapid burial. Usually, decomposition wins. Bacteria, scavengers, the elements, they destroy soft tissue within days. But in rare cases, a flash flood, a sudden landslide, a volcanic ashfall, an animal can be buried so quickly and so deeply that oxygen can't reach the body. Without oxygen, bacteria can't thrive. The body desiccates, dries out, and over time, minerals infiltrate the tissues, preserving them in stone. It's the same principle that preserves woolly mammoths in permafrost. Only with dinosaurs, the odds are even lower. That's why mummified dinosaurs are incredibly rare and incredibly precious. And thanks to modern technology, we're learning more than ever from them. CT scans, 3D mapping, synchrotron imaging. These tools allow scientists to look inside the fossil without damaging it. We can reconstruct not just the outside, but the internal organs, blood vessels, even muscle attachment points. We can calculate force, movement, posture, and sometimes we can reconstruct the voice. That's right. By analyzing the skull and resonance chambers of some mummified hadrosaurs, scientists have created digital simulations of what their calls might have sounded like. Deep, resonant bellows, low-frequency rumbles. These aren't roars. They're voices. Dinosaur voices, brought back from silence. Mummified fossils have also changed the way paleontologists reconstruct dinosaurs. Gone are the days of leathery monsters with uniform gray hides. Now we see texture, variation, and expression. We know some had wrinkles. Others had thick, elephant-like skin. Some had feathery tufts or spiky scales along their flanks. And most astonishing of all, we now know some species had muscles where we didn't expect them, more flexibility in the neck, more power in the tail, even hints of facial expressions, tightening skin around the eyes or muscle creases along the jawline. These weren't statues. They were animals full of motion, reaction, and life. Ultimately, the dinosaur mummies remind us of something vital. Bones are only part of the story. The rest, the skin, the behavior, the last breath, is often lost. But when nature gives us that glimpse, we have to pause and listen. Because in that moment, time collapses. The earth turns backward, and we are standing face to face with a creature that once blinked, breathed, moved, just like us. Not imagined, not sculpted, real. Chapter 18, The Lost Forests of the Dinosaurs. Ecosystems forgotten by time. We often picture dinosaurs in isolation, giants on a plain, stalking alone through open land or thundering across a canyon. But that's not how ecosystems work. Dinosaurs didn't live in empty wastelands. They lived in complex, vibrant worlds, dense forests, tangled swamps, fern-filled valleys, and strange deserts full of life. And many of those ecosystems, they don't exist anymore. The forests that fed sauropods, the wetlands that sheltered hadrosaurs, the highlands where raptors stalked small prey. These weren't just backdrops. They were lost worlds, environments, so alien today that we're only beginning to piece them together. Let's start with the late Cretaceous of North America, around 75 million years ago. At that time, the continent was split in half by a vast inland sea. To the west was a lush, humid land known as Larimedia, a narrow strip of swampy coastline that stretched from modern Alaska to Mexico. This thin corridor was packed with biodiversity. Imagine dense forests of towering conifers, palms, and flowering plants, interrupted by river systems, oxbow lakes, and muddy floodplains. Here, enormous herds of hadrosaurs like Corythosaurus grazed in groups. Massive ceratopsians like Centrosaurus or Pachyrhinosaurus wandered the lowlands, likely in seasonal migrations. And among the dense undergrowth, predators like Gorgosaurus, a close cousin of T-Rex, prowled with surprising agility. The air was heavy with humidity. Insects buzzed. Crocodile-like creatures lurked in the water. Turtles, frogs, small mammals, they all played their part. It was a swampy paradise, where life was abundant and competition was fierce. Today, there's nothing quite like it in North America. The closest parallel might be parts of the Amazon basin, but even that doesn't capture the alien blend of conifers and early flowering trees that once shaded those Cretaceous paths. Further back in time, during the Jurassic period, the world looked even stranger. Go to what is now Africa, and you'd find yourself in the realm of Giraffatitan and Allosaurus. But the landscape? Not endless desert. It was likely a savanna-like environment, dotted with massive ferns, primitive conifers, cycads, and horsetails. Rivers braided through flatlands, and seasonal rains turned the land into a green expanse perfect for sauropods to graze in herds. In places like the Morrison Formation in North America, a fossil-rich layer of Jurassic rock, evidence shows that these ecosystems supported huge biomass. Dozens of giant species living side by side. How? Because the plant life grew faster and thicker than we imagined. Some scientists believe atmospheric CO levels were much higher, creating a greenhouse world, where plants grew rapidly and covered vast areas in greenery. We struggle to picture today. And then there's the undergrowth, a world we almost never seen dinosaur reconstructions. But fossilized spores, pollen, and leaf impressions tell a different story. Beneath the tall ferns and conifers were carpets of mosses, liverworts, and seed ferns. Small animals thrived here, early mammals, lizards, and insects. Some dinosaurs, like Protoceratops, likely spent their lives in semi-arid shrublands, scrabbling through sand dunes dotted with scrubby vegetation, much like the Mongolian Gobi Desert today, except slightly more vegetated and filled with predators, like Velociraptor hiding in burrows or behind ridges. And what about the polar regions? Yes, polar dinosaurs were real, and they weren't just visitors. In parts of ancient Australia and Antarctica, dinosaurs lived year-round in regions that plunged into darkness for months at a time. The continents were in different positions, and while the climate was warmer overall, winter still brought long, cold nights. Dinosaurs like Leelinosaura, a small, fast-moving herbivore, had enlarged optic lobes, suggesting better vision in low light. Their communities likely braved harsh seasons, nesting, foraging, and surviving together in forests that are long gone. No redwoods, no pines. These were forests of extinct tree ferns, monkey puzzle trees, and other gymnosperms that blanketed the land in eerie green. Many of these prehistoric forests also hosted early flowering plants, the angiosperms, which exploded in diversity during the Cretaceous. This global flower revolution changed not only plant life but dinosaur diets. Herbivores evolved new jaws, new teeth, and new feeding strategies to take advantage of the softer, richer foliage. The rise of duck-billed hadrosaurs, for instance, is directly tied to the spread of flowering plants. These weren't random changes. They were ecological chain reactions, new plants, new behaviors, new species, and then it all vanished. When the asteroid hit 66 million years ago, it didn't just kill the dinosaurs. It annihilated the ecosystems they depended on. The global fires, the acid rain, the blocked-out sun, all of it brought down the complex web of life in days, weeks, or months. Forests died. Food chains collapsed. Many of the plants, especially the more delicate flowering ones, disappeared. Entire biomes were erased, like erasing a painting with one violent swipe. What's left today are just traces. Leaf impressions, pollen trapped in rocks, petrified logs in desert beds, and the bones of the creatures that once walked beneath those alien canopies. But piece by piece, scientists are recreating these lost environments, not just guessing what plants were around, but modeling climate, rainfall, temperature, even atmospheric composition. Some of these reconstructions are now so detailed they can simulate entire prehistoric food webs, showing how a fallen tree affected a browsing sauropod, which in turn affected predator movements. We're rebuilding not just animals, but the worlds that made them. It's a reminder that dinosaurs didn't evolve in a vacuum. They weren't just products of mutation and luck. They were shaped, challenged, and changed by the landscapes around them. And those landscapes were more diverse, more dynamic, and more alien than we ever imagined. Because to understand dinosaurs, we can't just look at their bones. We have to step into their forests, feel the soil, hear the insects, smell the ferns, and remember that some of the most extraordinary things that vanished from Earth weren't the animals. They were the ecosystems that birthed them. Chapter 19. How Dinosaurs Slept, Breathed, and Lived in the Dark. We spend so much time imagining dinosaurs in action, chasing, charging, hunting. But for most of their lives, they weren't doing any of that. They were resting, breathing, hiding, sleeping. And perhaps most intriguingly, many were active not under the blazing prehistoric sun, but in the dark. Nighttime wasn't just a void between events. It was a crucial, overlooked part of the dinosaur world, full of quiet behaviors, complex adaptations, and creatures that thrived while others slept. Let's begin with a question almost no one asks. How did dinosaurs sleep? At first, it seems impossible to answer. Fossils don't snore. They don't stretch or yawn. But once in a while, nature leaves us clues. In Mongolia, a fossil of Maylong, a small bird-like troodontid, was discovered in a sleeping position. Legs tucked under the body, head curled back beneath the arm. Just like a modern bird, this wasn't a guess. It was fossilized behavior, a moment of sleep, frozen in stone. Maylong means sleeping dragon, and it offered paleontologists their first real insight into how at least some dinosaurs rested, safely, tucked in, conserving heat, just like their modern avian cousins. And that wasn't a fluke. Other fossils from the same region show similar postures, suggesting this sleep style was widespread among small feathered theropods. Why? Because these dinosaurs weren't scaly lizards. They were warm-blooded, feathered, and highly active. Conserving body heat at night was critical, and curling up was a behavior, not just a position. It shows awareness, intent, a rhythm to life we don't often consider in these creatures. But sleep wasn't the same for all dinosaurs. Massive. Sauropods, like Apatosaurus or Dreadnoughtus, probably couldn't lie down for long. Their sheer weight made getting up dangerous. They may have rested standing up or reclined for short periods on softer ground, much like elephants do today. And if they did sleep lying down, it was likely brief, infrequent, and in safe, open spaces where predators wouldn't sneak up. This wasn't laziness. It was strategy. And then there's breathing, something every creature does, but not always the same way. For years, it was assumed dinosaurs breathed like reptiles, expanding and contracting lungs, using chest muscles to pump air in and out. But new fossil evidence tells a different story. Certain theropods, especially those closely related to birds, had air sacs, a system of hollow cavities that extended from the lungs into the bones. This is how modern birds breathe, in a one-way flow of air, allowing for much more efficient oxygen exchange than mammals or reptiles. It means they don't just inhale and exhale in cycles. Their air moves continuously through the lungs. That's part of why birds can fly at high altitudes or sustain long periods of exertion. And dinosaurs? They had it first. Fossils of Erostean, a carnivorous dinosaur from Argentina, showed clear evidence of air sacs in the chest and abdominal cavity. The bones were hollowed out in specific patterned ways that matched the air sac systems in birds. Other fossils from Magundasaurus, Allosaurus, and even sauropods show similar features. This wasn't a bird thing. It was a dinosaur innovation. A breathing system that let them stay active, regulate body temperature, and fuel their massive, demanding bodies. Dinosaurs weren't sluggish. They were efficient, high-performance animals, built for endurance and heat management. And this respiratory upgrade also played a role in something we rarely associate with dinosaurs: nocturnal life. For decades, dinosaurs were thought to be primarily diurnal, awake during the day, asleep at night. But recent studies flipped that assumption on its head. By examining the scleral rings, the bony structures in the eyes of some fossilized dinosaurs, scientists can estimate how much light those eyes were adapted to receive. In short, they can tell if a dinosaur was active during the day-night, or both. The results? Surprising. Small, fast-moving predators like Troodon had huge eyes, with scleral rings matching those of modern owls. These animals weren't just tolerating the dark, they thrived in it. They hunted under the stars, using keen vision and possibly even infrared sensitivity to locate prey. And they weren't alone. Many herbivorous species also showed adaptations for low-light conditions. This makes sense. Night was cooler, safer, and less competitive. Moving under the cover of darkness may have been a smart way to avoid predators and forage in peace. Even T. rex, long thought of as a daytime stalker, may have had excellent night vision. Its skull housed enormous olfactory bulbs, suggesting a powerful sense of smell, but its eye structure also supported activity at dawn, dusk, or nighttime. It may have been a crepuscular hunter, most active during the twilight hours. The shadows weren't a limitation. They were a tactical advantage, and it's not just about vision. Dinosaurs may have heard the night differently too. Studies of inner ear structures in theropods suggest they had sharp, finely tuned hearing. Some could detect low-frequency rumbles, much like elephants. Others may have communicated with booming sounds, hisses, or coos, not just roars. These were quiet signals perfect for nighttime communication. Mothers calling to hatchlings, mates warning of danger, or herds moving through the dark, keeping in touch with soft, resonant calls you'd never hear in a Jurassic Park soundtrack. So what did the nights actually feel like in the age of dinosaurs? Imagine the sounds. A deep croak of a prehistoric amphibian, the rustling of ferns, the distant thud of a sauropod's footfall, a sudden screech in the trees as a feathered raptor darts through the shadows. The air cools. The forest breathes. And above it all, under ancient starlight, a Truden watches, silent, alert. Adapted. These weren't monsters waiting for daylight. These were creatures of the full cycle, diurnal, nocturnal, and everything in between. Their world didn't switch off at sunset. It just changed rhythm. And when you understand that, something remarkable happens. Dinosaurs stop being symbols of power or terror. They start to feel real, animals with sleep patterns, with breath, rest, and nightly rituals. Not just surviving, but living in every hour of the day, because even in the age of giants, life moved in quiet moments, and some of the most fascinating stories happened not in the chase, but in the dark. Chapter 20, The Dinosaurs That Lived After the Extinction. 2,000 words. Let's rewind to the most catastrophic day in Earth's history. 66 million years ago, an asteroid the size of a mountain slammed into what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. The impact unleashed more energy than 1 billion atomic bombs. Wildfires roared across continents. Earthquakes tore the ground apart. Tsunamis taller than skyscrapers swept across the seas. And then came the darkness. Dust and ash blotted out the sun. Photosynthesis halted. Plants withered. Ecosystems collapsed. It wasn't just dinosaurs that died. Entire food chains were gutted. From microscopic plankton in the oceans to towering titanosaurs on land. In a matter of weeks to months, the age of dinosaurs appeared to be over. But that's only part of the story, because not all dinosaurs died. Some of them were small, feathered, beaked, and light enough to hide, adapt, and survive the burning skies and freezing darkness. They didn't just endure the extinction event, they evolved. These survivors weren't reptiles hiding in holes. They were ancestors of what we now call birds. And the shocking truth? Birds are dinosaurs, not just related to them. Not just inspired by them. Biologically, genetically, anatomically, they are dinosaurs. Living, breathing, flapping reminders that the Mesozoic never fully ended. This isn't speculative. It's scientific consensus. Every time a robin pecks your lawn, or a hawk soars overhead, or a pigeon waddles through a city park, you're watching a dinosaur, not a metaphorical one. A literal lineal descendant of creatures that once shared the planet with T-Rex. So, what allowed these small feathered dinosaurs to survive when all their larger cousins vanished? Several things. First, size. The asteroid created a world in chaos, colder, darker, and starving. Massive herbivores had no plants to eat. Carnivores had no prey. But the bird-like dinosaurs? They were small, often under 1 meter long. Small. Animals need less food. They can hide in burrows, trees, and crevices. They're more adaptable. Some may have survived by eating seeds, tough little packages that can last through long winters and disasters. And evidence suggests that some of these species, like early aves, already had beaks designed for cracking them open. Second, flight. It gave them mobility. While large land-dwelling dinosaurs were trapped in collapsing environments, flying dinosaurs could escape, relocate, search for food, and nest in safer areas. Flight wasn't just an advantage, it was a lifeline. Third, reproduction. Small theropods likely had shorter gestation times, faster life cycles, and flexible parenting behaviors. Species that can breed quickly and adapt to changing conditions tend to do better during mass extinctions. The fossil record even shows nests and eggs in post-impact strata, suggesting that some bird-line dinosaurs began reproducing almost immediately after the disaster. And then, evolution took over. The survivors diversified rapidly. In the aftermath of the extinction, new ecosystems began to form. Without the massive non-avian dinosaurs dominating every niche, the bird dinosaurs exploded into opportunity. Some grew long legs and ran through new grasslands. Others developed wide wings and soared over oceans. Some evolved into aquatic forms like penguins. Others, like parrots and corvids, developed remarkable intelligence. And through this great radiation, we ended up with everything from hummingbirds to ostriches. All dinosaurs, just in new clothes. Fossils confirm this. Transitional forms like Archaeopteryx, Confuciusornis, and its Thiornes show us the stages between. Toothy, clawed raptors and modern songbirds. Some had teeth. Others had claws on their wings. Some still had long tails or primitive bone structures. Over millions of years, the bird body plan refined itself, but it never stopped being a dinosaur. In fact, some of their ancestors, like the famous velociraptor, already had feathers, wishbones, and bird-like hips. When you strip away Hollywood's scaly monsters and look at the fossil record, the line between bird and dinosaur doesn't blur. It vanishes. Evolution didn't make birds from scratch. It repurposed dinosaurs to that, so the real twist is this. The age of dinosaurs didn't end, it changed. The thunderous age of giants became the subtle age of flyers. And over time, as mammals rose to dominance and the Earth's ecosystem shifted, birds kept adapting, surviving ice ages, shaping continents, crossing oceans, and eventually coexisting with us. And while we've wiped out many species, the truth is undeniable. Over 10,000 species of dinosaurs are alive today. They chirp outside your window. They swoop over your cities. They build nests and lay eggs and defend their young with everything they've got. They still have scales on their feet. They still lay eggs, just like Triceratops did. And some still have claws on their wings, echoes of a more ferocious past. Even the mighty T-Rex lives on, not just in museums, but in chickens. Genetic studies have confirmed it. Chickens and ostriches are closer to T-Rex than any modern reptile. Scientists have even activated dormant genes in bird embryos that produce teeth, relics from their carnivorous ancestry. We are on the edge of understanding how evolution leaves fingerprints behind. And the fingerprints on birds scream one thing. Dinosaur. Think about that the next time you see a flock of geese take flight. They are descendants of creatures that once ruled the world, survivors of an apocalypse. Not just pretty wings and songs, but resilient, ancient beings that outlived extinction. We often mourn the loss of the dinosaurs. But maybe we shouldn't, because they're not extinct. They're flying above us, perched on wires, diving through the sea, chirping in the dawn light. And when we look at them, we're not just seeing birds. We're seeing the last chapter of an ancient dynasty, one that began with monsters and lives on in feathers.